employee opinion survey, we'll share the results and the whole world will change overnight. And of course it doesn't. What he looks at is everything is in a tipping point. And what you're trying to do is get it to tip. But what you do is you do lots and lots and lots of things and nothing changes and and then suddenly one day you come in and it's changed. And you don't know what was the thing that finally changed it. And certainly you can't plan what it is. It's just you keep at it. And sometimes you get setbacks, but you keep at it because, you know, it's interesting. I was having a conversation with another organization. I'm running a program with them next week. And we were discussing what gets in the way of them being truly strategic. And one of the big issues was a lot of the line managers don't see their HR business partners in that light. And actually, they want them to be transactional. They want them to do all their HR admin-y stuff for them. You know, they want you to do the disciplinary with an awkward person rather than coach them on how to do it. The challenge is that it shouldn't be their decision to take because that isn't your role. But you can't change their opinion overnight. And I think the example with that role profile is really insightful, is by asking the right questions and engaging in the right way around the right agenda. It changed the view of that specific issue, but it will change their view of you as well.
Yeah, I think so, because there is this new rule that is coming, and he actually, for the first time, he has proactively sent me the job description and said that, Preeti, what do you think? And I was like, wow, I have to tell this to Nick, because that was, I think, was a change that had never happened. So that's one of the biggest achievement I would say from the workshop until now.
One of my learning points in my life is it's 15 years since I left corporate life, and without being arrogant, it's been really successful, and it's all been down to serendipity. Everything that's happened that's been a success has been a serendipity. But there are two things I've learned. Well, three things I've learned. You can never predict serendipity because it's a serendipity. But you can increase the chances of serendipity happening. And when it happens, you know what to do and you're ready for it. And I think that's the tipping point, is it is serendipity. You can't, you know, because that manager, you could have, you know, he could have been in a bad mood that day and you could have answered the same questions. It wouldn't have worked, but it was, you know, the stars and the moon aligned, and that's where we're at. Brilliant. So Nursel, you're next on my screen. And Michelle, by the way, hi. I was just sharing what we're doing is just going around each person. I don't have an agenda. So I'm just asking everybody to reflect on not really the course, but what have you done since then? What's worked? What hasn't worked? And there's also a general open question for anybody. If you've got me for an hour, if there's anything else you want to discuss or talk about, preferably around HR, I can talk about anything, as you probably worked out already. So Nursel, what have been your reflections and experiences?
Actually, you know, during our training, and one of the things that I really like, and which is our like role play, and it taught me a lot, because sometimes and during our leadership team meeting and that kind of things, and I wasn't really contribute enough, and I found out that I'm not really contribute enough. So after these sessions, and you know, even for some business cases also, I try to be involved really, and I try to give my opinion, because there is no really like to be shy or to be like, or well, let's say there is no really silly question. And I thought, because I was a little bit shy if I say something wrong, because it is not related to HR, so why I involved, and that kind of things, you know. And so right now I'm more confident during the such meeting. I feel more confident, let's say, yeah.
And I think it's really interesting. So first of all, in all my research, there are a number of absolute core things that differentiate great HR people. Confidence and courage are absolutely core to it. Because if, like me, you fundamentally lack confidence, do you remember I told you the story about when I was in the army and I liked to be liked? You know, that reflected the fact that I fundamentally lacked self-confidence. And of course, the army experience took whatever I had left and completely destroyed it. And, you know, I'm okay now, but you've got to have enough confidence to take yourself out of the equation. You know, somebody's put it as you have to have enough ego to take your ego out of the equation. It's never about you. And therefore, I think contributing to conversations, to me, there are two agendas. One is there is an ongoing agenda of building your credibility and building your confidence, and it will grow as you contribute. But the other agenda is simply making sure that you ask the right questions and contribute in the right way. And particularly, the danger to me is often the people and organizational issues aren't raised. And I see too many HR people who lack self-confidence assume that because they're not being talked about, people don't think they need to be talked about because there are no issues there. In my experience, they don't talk about it because they're not experts, because they're just not even thinking about that. I ran a session for Oracle with all their European HR directors. And what we did was we had this model of a conversation with a line manager that shifts from what do you want HR to do to starting with the business. And I don't think I shared it with you, but what I'll do is after this call, I'll send you all a copy. And what we did was, funnily enough, Nick Foster was the EMEA HR director, and Nick Jackson, I only work with Nicks, was the EMEA COO. And what Nick, the HR Nick, interviewed using that framework, the operational Nick. And at the end of it, we were having a quick reflection, and the COO said, I came here today to help Nick with your training. When Nick's just run through that, I realized, and this won't make sense until you see the model, when he asked me the third and fourth questions, first of all, I realized I didn't know the answer to them. And secondly, I realized I really should. These are critical questions. They were questions about capability and, you know, strategic workforce planning. And actually, I'm going to get my secretary to set up a meeting with Nick. This is the HR Nick, and we're going to go through this live. But, you know, everyone around that table, their learning point was, you mean Nick, you know, the COO of the whole business in Europe has never thought about these questions. So don't assume that because they're not asking them, they know the answer. And I think that therefore, and this is my other tip, is don't wait to be asked. Because if you wait to be asked, you'll be the last person at the end of the meeting when they start dealing with HR issues. What I would do is, and this is, do you remember we talked about Catherine at Mercedes-Benz when she didn't wait to be asked, she just sat there. But the other thing is, Catherine looked at the agenda for every leadership team meeting and did her preparation, did her research, and had questions or information or inputs on every single one of those questions. So after a while, nobody saw her as the HR person. They just saw her as a member of the team. And that's what we should see ourselves at. You're not just representing HR doing HR. You are part of that team contributing to all aspects. But it doesn't happen overnight. And the best thing is prepare. Fiona. Sorry, Nursel, was there anything you wanted to say?
No, it's okay. Thank you very much, Nick.
So I like a bit of reflection. I like to sit in that space. So I think my reflections after the session is just sort of helped understand me and my personality at work, if you like, especially sort of in this BP role, because I'd sort of, back into HR prior to that, spent a chunk of time in learning and development, and sort of started my career in HR, so it's kind of changed and moved. I think what the realization that I've come to is that throughout the space of my career, I like to be an idea generator. I like to be that person at the start that says, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? Without any sort of constraints or anything, sky's the limit, that kind of very initial state. I like that. I also have learned to be good at the sort of completer finisher stuff, because that's what we did in my time in L&D. We set up a team from nothing and established it within the business, and it was all about sort of dragging various things across the lines. I've learned to be good at that. I think what it's been to the detriment of is just that very important bit in the middle, which I've just not been able to flex that muscle just as much. But I think that's quite comforting for me, because I think in this HR business partner role, there's certain aspects of it that I feel quite uncomfortable with, or a little bit out of my depth with. So I think coming to that realization that it's because you've not had to flex that muscle for a while. I think I've forgotten how to be curious. So I've kind of been used to going and taking remits from people and saying, right, okay, and when do you need that done for? And, how can we assist with that? And then going on and just beavering away and doing it. I think I've forgotten during all that how to be curious, how to ask questions, and be comfortable in doing that, and be comfortable in taking up a little bit of that space, especially in those senior meetings. It's okay, you're in those meetings for a reason. You're not just there to make up the numbers. But if you don't ask questions, you don't get involved, then that will be the only reason that you're there. So it's in your hands to sort of change that. So I think over the last few weeks, whilst I've probably not changed anything, I have probably sort of dipped my toe in the water in terms of asking those, and what does that mean, and how does that relate to this, and trying to get some questions in there just to get myself used to the process. And just noticing the aspects of my role that do spark that sort of slight anxiety, out of my depth reaction in me, and trying to understand the reasons why. What is it about it that makes it uncomfortable? So yeah, I think that's where I'm up to.
It's interesting because we talked about courage and confidence. There's another C, curiosity. And I think I don't think that's about being a good HR business partner. I don't even think it's about being a good business person. I think it's about being a good human being. I think if you look at studies of leadership, what they call learning agility, which is that continuous lifelong learning, is a direct correlation to success. Believe me, I might be 61, but I spend probably at least 2 hours every day learning. It's not much of it is structured, a lot of it's unstructured, but the last thing I do before I go to bed, well, the second to last thing, the last thing is I have a cuddle, but the second to last thing is I read. I have a Kindle and I will read every night. And I unfortunately, I don't read rom-coms or novels. I read fact. I love reading. There's an interesting thing though about this sort of self-understanding. And I'm going to say something which is not aimed at anybody, but I think it's an important thing I realized a few years ago. Whenever are you all familiar with the concept of Johari windows? Anybody not? So Johari windows is, there are two axes. It's a 4-box model. I'm a consultant. We always have 4-box models. It's known to self, unknown to self, known to others, unknown to others. So obviously the space we're effective is if we understand ourselves and people are clear who we are. And life is about extending that, particularly into the blind spot, where, the axe murderer, I didn't kill the person, and Oh, really? They're an axe murderer? That's a surprise. Well, actually they are. And so part of, I think, the journey for all of us is understanding ourselves through reflection. I think I've probably done just about every single psychometric known to man. And by the way, most of them, especially MBTI, are a load of absolute rubbish. MBTI is snake oil. There is absolutely no scientific methodology behind it. It's a money-making machine. Don't use it. Anyway, but having done Hogan and all the others, it's taught me about myself. But obviously the other thing is getting feedback from other people. And the more we have the confidence to seek feedback, not just through formal 360s, but my learning point is, as you explore that, particularly when you get feedback from other people, there are 3 ways that you can look at that feedback. One is they tell me I'm not whatever. Well, actually, they're fundamentally wrong. I am. But they seem to not see that. So what I need to think about is, how do I show who I really am? How do I change these people's opinion? A second way of looking at it is they tell me I'm not good at it. And do you know what? I'm not. They're absolutely right. But it's something I can do. It's something I want to do. And my action plan now is, how do I ask better questions or whatever? And how do I contribute more at leadership meetings? How do I prioritize more effectively? And over a period of time, I learn how to do that. But there's a third one, which is tough. The third one is, actually, that is me, but I don't think I can develop that. And I'm not sure I really want to develop that. So in my final years in corporate life, I got feedback I wasn't structured enough. I could learn that. I could put teams around me who did it for me. But I got 2 pieces of feedback. One was I couldn't deal with underperformers. I'm just fundamentally too nice. I don't like having, and I'm English. And we don't like confronting things, as my Danish wife keeps pointing out. We'd rather, go around it and not actually. And also, I lack gravitas. So I like telling jokes. And in a situation like this, I think it helps learning. But, I'd be in a board meeting and my little inner voice would be saying, Nick, don't tell the joke. Don't tell the joke. It's a board meeting. Don't. And what would I do? I'd tell the bloody joke. And everybody around the table would go, what? And I realized that those were 2 things I didn't want to change. And even more fundamentally, I couldn't change them. I don't have the self-control. I don't have gravitas. It's just not me. And that led me to leaving corporate life and doing a totally different job. Now, I'm not saying leave corporate life and do a different job, but as you're building your self-awareness, it's becoming more and more aware of how people see you and how you can shift that, what you can do that's required to do the job. But also it's being honest with yourself of, are there things, you can't go on an intellect course. We can increase our intellect a little bit, but fundamentally we have the brain power we have, which is therefore potentially going to be limiting. And it's having the courage and the self-confidence to say, actually, my career is probably going to go sideways now. And the challenge for the next few years is, how do I get challenge and how do I get learning when I'm not going to get the next big job? Because I don't know, Nursel, if you've ever heard, we have a saying in England called Peter's Principle. And Peter's Principle is, we all get promoted 1 level above our competence. We all get to go 1 job too high. That's what's called Peter's Principle. And my learning point was, if I'd become a group HR director, which was my next job, I would have failed spectacularly because I just couldn't do it. Everybody else seemed to think I could do it. I seemed to be the only person who knew I couldn't. Now, the worst thing I could have done was being promoted into that job and have my self-confidence destroyed by a year later, being called into the CEO to say, it's not really working, is it, Nick? Because I knew it would never work. I wasn't bad, by the way. I just wasn't good at those two things. But be honest with yourself. I think the other thing is, for all of you, there's a brilliant, I don't know if I shared, did I show you this? So this was given to me by my team when I left Vodafone, and it was the first ever BlackBerry in the UK. And on here is a quote from Oscar Wilde. It says, "Be yourself, everyone else is already taken." The point being, don't try and be somebody you're not to fit a job. Be the best version of you can be. So the next one along the line is Anna. By the way, Anna.
Hi everyone. Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that I took away was that I made a finance buddy. So I sort of knew the finance business partner for our team, but didn't really have a good relationship with her. So we've started building that up. So that's really worked well. The next thing I sort of think has worked well is sort of coming to the table with solutions as well. So I don't feel like that was sort of part of my role. I used to just sort of go along with whatever somebody suggested, but I'm sort of suggesting solutions to problems now. And that's been really good. I've had some really good feedback on that. I think, yeah, things that haven't worked so well is just getting that seat at the table. We are such a hierarchical organisation. It just seems impossible, but it's something that I will continue to work on. And the next thing for me as well is looking at the bigger picture and what our organisation's about, because to be honest, when I've looked back, I didn't really know what the bigger mission was, and we are huge. So I'm starting to sort of think outside of our organisation and look at what exactly are we looking to achieve. So that's helping as well, and it sort of gives you more credibility when speaking to people. So that's worked quite well.
Brilliant. And I think that, and the bigger picture is, it's not a task to be done ticking the box. It's a constant journey. Yeah. And it was interesting. We ran a session yesterday. We just had a research report we published literally this week on strategic workforce planning. And we ran a session on it. By the way, I didn't write it, and it's brilliant. I don't know if any of you have seen it. You might be interested. I'll make sure, Katie, could we make sure we send it out to everybody? But I was reflecting yesterday. We had how many people? We had well over 200 people on the call. And I was reflecting, we need to do more future back and outside in thinking. What we tend to do, and this isn't just HR, this is almost everybody. And I find most operational line managers are even worse at this. They're all focused on their little world this week, and long term is next week. Whereas future back thinking is, where is this organization going? Not just in a year, but in 3 to 5 years, where will we be? And working back from that, what do we need to be doing in HR to deliver that? The other concept is outside in thinking. And this is thinking outside HR, but also thinking outside the organization. So it's understanding the bigger picture in terms of the organization. But I passionately believe one of the roles of HR is to bring the outside in, and yes, specific things around employment law and demographics. But I think we should be even more aware of what's going on in the wider world around technology, society, disruption, etc. Because you look at COVID brought the outside in to every company, and everybody I know in HR stepped up to the plate in a way they hadn't before. And HR became more relevant than it's ever been. Let's not lose that opportunity. Let's build on it. But I do think that concept of really thinking bigger picture, because it gives you credibility, but it gives you relevance. And also, I think that what I always try to do in the last 15 years is create what I call oh shit moments. by which I mean, I'm hoping people will go, oh shit, I hadn't even thought of that. And sometimes when you can ask the question and they go, wow, Anna, I'd never even thought of that. And when you can then also go, oh, by the way, here's a solution to it, because that's the real trick, is to do all the work around the outside, give them the insight, but also help them find a way through it. Because most leaders deal with unbelievable ambiguity and complexity. And what they love is somebody who can take something and create certainty and simplicity. And by the way, I don't think designing a new performance management system actually helps. I think it does the opposite. But anyway, thanks very much. Laura.
Hello. I suppose for me, it's really a confidence thing. I think over the last, has it been a month, a few weeks? I can't remember how long ago it was now.
2 years, isn't it?
I just feel an awful lot more confident in that virtual room, that I am meant to be there and that actually I have a voice, I'm there to input. I've also felt a lot more confident in terms of pushing back to, so say for example, a query comes in that is meant for HR admin, knowing that that is not for me and that we've got a centre of excellence there to deal with it. And just working with the managers so that they understand that as well. So I think for me, it's just really made me understand my role, define it myself, and then make other people aware of that as well. And I do feel as though people are coming to me for the right things now. So yeah, just confidence is the main thing that I've taken away from it. So thank you very much for that. Pleasure.
So let me ask you a question. What's different? Confidence to me is an outcome of something. What are the underpinnings that have changed over the last few weeks? I'm asking to help you reflect, but I think it'll help everybody else reflect on, because we've said right from the beginning, confidence is everything. But I don't think you build confidence just by being confident. You understand the building blocks. So what are your building blocks?
I think, like I said on the training course, from the start of my career, I've always been told HR are there to advise. So I will ask a million questions in every scenario. That is probably one of my strengths, to draw out what's the issue by asking questions. And then my advice would always be very much, that's my advice, take it or leave it. The risk sits with you. Whereas now I feel confident to say, no, you cannot do that because of X, Y, and Z. So I feel as though I'm more part of the decision-making, part of, that senior management, and making sure that any risks, I'm also accountable for those as well. So yeah, I think it's just been a shift of mindset for me, in that I'm not just there to advise, and actually I am there to support in decision making and make decisions myself if needs be.
I think it's brilliant. I think it's one of the things that really annoys me about HR. So I will often ask HR people, who is accountable for managing your people? And let me ask all of you, who is accountable for managing your people? Who's accountable for people management in your organization?
Line managers.
Anybody else? Anybody disagree with that? Because I fundamentally disagree with that. And I asked it to get that reply, because to me, line managers manage your people, but we are accountable for the management of people. If a line manager is not doing it well, the danger is if we see ourselves as just an advisor who isn't accountable for the outcome, then we can just go, oh, line managers aren't doing it very well. To me, what accountability means is understanding, why is that line manager not managing their people effectively? Is it an isolated case and they've been over promoted or they haven't been trained? Is it a more, a more enterprise-wide issue about the way we're training and developing our managers or who we're recruiting, we need to diagnose what the problem is with managers managing their people, but we need to come up with a solution, which is that's what you said that prompted me to think that. Ultimately, in the people and organizational space, we are accountable for the outcome. Now, the challenge for so many of us is, whilst we're accountable, we don't do it. And that can be highly, highly challenging. But we should never escape from that feeling of we are accountable. We are the people and organizational people. And it's not good enough if we give advice and managers ignore it and we end up in an industrial tribunal, or we end up with a strike, or whatever it is, because they are not experts. Now, do you remember I talked about the wall of employment law, policies, process, etc. So I think what you can't do, Laura, is go too far the other way and just start saying no. Because if all you do is say no, they will find a way around you. They'll go to one of your colleagues or they'll ignore HR completely. But I think it's that engage them in a conversation where in the back of your mind is, I'm here to tell you can't do that. But I want you to arrive at that conclusion yourself and own it and want to do it, rather than feeling that I've stopped you, because, oh, bloody hell, here go HR again. They're the BPU. I remember in one organization, HR had the nickname of the BPU, the Business Prevention Unit. But, we need to be comfortable with accountability. I worked at Merrill Lynch in the 80s, and the one thing as an investment banker, and the one thing I learned was hold yourself accountable. And I was in an office one day and the phone was ringing, and what had been hammered home was, even if it's not your phone, it could be a customer. So make sure you pick it up after the first call and then find out what the problem is. And you don't have to fix the problem. That's the nature of accountability. But make sure that customer query is solved. So one day I was in the office and the phone was ringing. So I picked it up and this voice goes, "Don't do that again." I said, "I'm really, really sorry. I've just picked the phone up. Can I help you?" He said, don't give me that. Don't do that again. And I said, "Look, I'm really sorry. What's happened?" He said, "You put the phone down on me. Don't do it again." And I said, "But I didn't put the phone down. I've had enough of this. Do you know who I am?" And I said, "No." He said, "I am Fred Lutz." And I'm thinking, my God, Fred Lutz was the managing director of Merrill Lynch, Western Europe. It's kind of like God's. And I just thought, what on earth do I do now? So I just said, "Do you know who I am?" And he said, "No." So I put the phone down. Don't ever, ever, ever do that. That's not taking accountability. But I felt very proud at the time, until my boss came out of his office about 10 minutes later with this bright red throbbing ear, shouting, "Who put the phone down on Fred Lutz twice?" And I didn't put my hand up because I hadn't put the phone down on him twice. It was only once. But anyway, it's Friday afternoon. It's just a joke. True story, but I think if confidence is the core, I think this is for all of us. You don't build confidence by building confidence. You build confidence by understanding what are the triggers for you and what can you prepare and what can you do differently to develop your confidence. I don't know if I shared this. I'm fundamentally introverted, but to do my job, I have to be an extrovert. So, I presented in front of 5,000 people. If you told me 30 years ago I would be doing that, I would have just said, "You're an absolute liar." I was scared stiff of presenting. I don't know if you had debating societies at school and things like that. I would never volunteer for that. I was always the one at the back. But when I changed careers, I realized I'd have to do this. And the way I learned how to do it was just doing it. And I just did it, and I did it, and I did it. And one day I suddenly realized I had the confidence to do it. Be the change you want to see, I believe was what Gandhi said. So be clear what you want to be be clear that that is somebody you can be, because I'm never going to be Michael Jordan. You obviously can't see, but I'm only about 4'6" tall, and I would never ever be a professional basketball player. 5'10", by the way, but I was never going to be a basketball player. But then think what you're going to do to get you there. Michelle.
Hi, everyone. You know, it's actually been really interesting because I took this class at the time when I have shifted the business unit that I support. So the teams and departments I was working with, I guess, for about the last 4 years, I knew them really well. And I think I had stopped, you know, similar, I think I was to Fiona. I think I'd maybe stopped, or maybe it was Anna, maybe I just stopped being curious, you know, because I knew them quite well. I knew the business. I think I just kind of became a bit complacent. But actually, at the same time that I started, you know, after taking this session, I started to support kind of a new department, and really they're the most complicated in our organization. They're key to the organization in terms of the work that we do, kind of the bread and butter. So it really couldn't have come at a better time. And I would say my main takeaway was to go into this new role, you know, this new team with a really curious mindset. And I would say I've been approaching it by using the opportunity as a new business partner for them to ask a lot of questions, and trying to get them, you know, the critical questions as well, to try to get them to think about some of the things that I'm seeing. So that's one piece and I'm continuing to do that. And reflect afterwards on what more I have asked, or could have I asked things in a different way? Because sometimes you just don't get it right, you know. And so I think that's important. The other thing that I really took away is the importance of data, especially because this team is so large as well. I think I'm relying on data myself to understand, you know, what's really happening in the business, but I'm also kind of bringing managers and directors back to thinking about data and providing that to help them, and to you know, just to where I can, you know, to really confirm facts, I guess. You know, I think data is really important. So I think that really resonated with me as well.
Brilliant. It's funny, we got another C, but at the other end of the spectrum, which is complacency.
Yeah.
And I think complacency is a really, really, really dangerous thing, because you start getting in your comfort zone. And do any of you like being in your comfort zone?
It's great.
I love it. It's brilliant. It's a great place. It's relaxing. Is it a good place to spend your whole life? Absolutely not. And, you know, I think back 15 years ago when I left corporate life, bloody hell was that scary. Wow, was that scary. In fact, just under my laptop, I keep I won't tear it off because it's stuck there, but I actually have a little Dilbert cartoon that I stuck on my desk 15 years ago. And on the left, it says, "I'm thinking of quitting and becoming an entrepreneur." And it says, "I want to experience life on the edge, full of risk and challenge and adventure." And then Dilbert says, "The company stops paying you if you quit." And then he goes, "Oh, never mind." But it was the best decision I ever made. And I've never for a second regretted it. And throughout my life, where I've taken those personal risks, I've never regretted it. And it's interesting. On one of the other programs, I get somebody called Jenny Duvalier to come and talk. And she's one of the most impressive women leaders I've ever worked with. She was a very senior HR director at Arm. Don't know if you know Arm Holdings. It's the biggest tech company in the UK. They basically provide all the tech behind mobile phones. So they develop all the software and then they license them. So they don't manufacture it. So you imagine that. Most of the IP in here is owned by them, but they don't have to pay any of the cost of producing it. What a great business model. She's now a non-executive director in like the Guardian Media Group, etc. And I remember getting her in kind of quite a senior group, and then she left and we debriefed it. And people were saying, "Wow, I could never do I could never be that good." And I said, no, you got this totally wrong. At your stage in her career, she would never have believed she could be what she is today, because you're comparing yourself to the end product, you know, and therefore, you know, you need to think, what's the next step? And going into a business unit which you're not familiar with, going in, you know, I personally think, and this is backed up by research, the best way to develop as an HR person is to go into a line role for a couple of years, to get out of HR completely and go and do a line job in your business and then go back into HR. It will make you so much more effective. But boy, will you find it tough to begin with, because you won't have all your professional expertise as the kind of foundation, but you'll learn so much more. I think that, you know, we talked about questions a lot. And I think particularly in a new role, there are two types of questions. One I'd ask, one I wouldn't ask. There are simple questions of fact that you should find out. Don't ask those questions. It just makes you look a bit stupid and naive. It's the questions that will drive other people's insights, that will help you, but will also, by asking the question the right way, you know, why do we, you know, it's just, you know, one of the great questions is, why exactly do we do it that way? So I remember being a company called Lex. We had a business called Lex Vehicle Leasing. So we had 120,000 cars on 3-year leases. So every year, 40,000 cars would come back to us. And there was this sheet of paper that was left on the driver's seat for the driver to fill out. And I asked the question, why? And anyway, we managed to follow this piece of paper through 12, these were the days before emails, etc. So literally this piece of paper went in internal, do you remember the orange internal envelopes? Anybody old enough to remember that with the boxes? 12 different things they go through to different parts of the country. And then eventually it got to this last bloke. He said, so what do you do with it? He said, I don't know, nobody briefed, I'll chuck them in the bin. So you imagine 12 pieces of paper times, sorry, one piece of paper times 40,000 times 12 processes. Think how much money, but nobody had ever asked why we're doing it. And I think those are the powerful questions that particularly as a newbie, you can ask, and people will go, well, we do it because actually it's a bloody good question. And never forget with data, never start with the data. Start with the problem and the hypothesis. But if you present data to line managers, they'll get it and they'll trust you far more. I think Hannah, looking at chat, has had a connection problem and has dropped out. So I can't see you. So if you're there, shout. No, she did put a note in chat. Anything else? I hope this is useful, because it's, as much as anything, I'm just trying to force you to reflect. That's my big driver, but hopefully I've shared some additional thoughts. Any other questions that you have, apart from can we go so I can finish off my report, Nursel? But and thank you for sticking with us. Anything else you just want to talk about or raise? Otherwise, I'll give you 7 minutes back on a Friday afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Have a great weekend. Bye all.